So just to let you know, we are recording now. I will be letting people in as they come along as well. So I'll try to multitask as much as I can. So thank you for joining this afternoon. My name is Sarah Wilkin, and this is the third episode of In the Loop, which is a monthly meeting for our members. Today we've got a really great panel of different experts and also different perspectives on the SAF market, and we'll be getting into some discussions on policy, the grid, eSAFs, and different business models that are now developing the SAF market. So would everybody? So I'll just if we can go around, and if you just want to initially say your name and what role you're having, we can go into a further intros as we develop the conversation. So do you want to start, Tom, by letting us know who you are and what you're doing?
No problem, Sarah. Many thanks, and many thanks for having me on this podcast. My name's Thomas Hughes, and I am the Strategic Markets Editor covering biofuels and feedstocks here at Fastmarkets, which is a price reporting agency. So we cover news, analysis, and also report on pricing for key commodities within the agriculture, metals, and forestry sectors.
Thanks, Tom. Christoph?
My name is Christop Weber. Thank you very much, Sarah. Great initiative. Good perspective and the right subjects that you've chosen. I've been in this sector for the last 15, maybe even 20 years, getting my feet dirty as an agricultural guy in plantations, with plantations in Indonesia, Vietnam, Madagascar, and other countries, and then moving to liquids and ultimate to electrons, and have been active as a pioneer in the eSAF market, engineered, designed, and built the first pilot P2L plant in Germany, and engineered 2 large industrial scale plants, 60,000 tons. And I am chasing politicians, and I'm observing politicians so that we all have the right level playing field to move on with our dear subject.
Sounds good. A veteran, which we don't have many of, so thank you. Arnaud, would you like to intro yourself?
Yep, thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having us. It's going to be a really good conversation. I'm Arnaud. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Atoba Energy. So at Atoba, we're an aggregator of SAF to enable, to solve financial dilemmas that happen between airlines, the end customer, and the producers, to solve the long-term offtake agreements today that are not happening and blocking the entire ecosystem from really scaling fast. And so my background is more on my side, on the aviation side. So I've been 10 years at Airbus, and then transitioning gradually to smaller and smaller companies in order to make a bigger difference faster. And happy to be with all of you today and have these discussions.
Thank you. That's really great. So we've got, as you can see from our panel, we've got a real mix of contributors to the SAF market. So I think what we're going to do today is, if Tom, you are working on, as you mentioned, at Fastmarkets, you're a pricing house, you're looking at how the market is moving, the prices, and you know a lot of the policy aspects of the SAF market. We are talking about the SAF market today. However, Tom, you also cover biodiesels as well. So I think if you can give us a little bit of a background on what you're seeing is happening, mandates, and what the status is really. It would be really great to hear from you, Tom.
No problem. Thank you, Sarah. So at the moment, this year's marked the start of, in Europe, 2 distinct SAF mandates, one in the UK, one in the EU, covering all 27 member states of the EU bloc. Now, currently for 2025, 2% of all jet fuel in the EU and also in the UK will need to be from sustainable aviation fuel. Now in the EU, that will rise to 6% by 2030. And in the UK, it's even more ambitious. It will rise to 10% by 2030. Furthermore, we'll see a rise in the UK to 22% by 2040, and in the EU, potentially to 70% by 2050. Now, within that mix, it's important to note that there are different production pathways for SAF. The only one that is really commercially viable currently, and that is at scale, is the HEFA process, so hydrotreated esters and fatty acids. Basically, to keep it simple, it's a similar production process to manufacturing SAF that's used for biodiesel is utilized, and that can either be in a dedicated hydroesters and fatty acids plant that can also typically produce hydrotreated vegetable oil, otherwise known as renewable diesel, or in a system called co-processing, where a company like an oil major can use an existing gas oil diesel run to process these particular crop-based, oil, fatty acids and oil-based feedstocks that go into it.
Now there are quite often used cooking oil. Yep.
Exactly, yeah, and there are restrictions specifically with the Refuel EU SAF mandate restricting feedstocks to waste-based only. And in the UK, that's also the case. Now, what's interesting is that at the start of this process, we've not really seen a great deal of activity on the spot market. So that's buying for now, for delivery within 20 to 30 days' time. A lot of long-term agreements have been agreed between airlines and suppliers very often. And some of those have been voluntary, so outside of these mandates, but some of them have been as part of these mandates. So as a result, and given the relatively low mandate, 2%, there hasn't been a great deal of spot activity. Some of the agreements, as we understand, were at pretty high premiums, 3 to 4 times the price of fossil jet fuel. And basically, even though some long-term agreements have included other production pathways, currently HEFA and co-processing is the only one that's at commercial scale currently. Additionally, there have been problems with perceived low prices. Effectively, we've seen prices for SAF trending at around sort of $50 lower than prices for used cooking oil-based HVO or renewable diesel. And part of that is because road mandates within the EU have increased. So there is pressure to hit these higher road mandates. And in the EU, the road fuel pool is much bigger than the jet fuel pool. So there's been, and one of the things you can do with HVO, otherwise called renewable diesel, that also comes from the same plant, typically that SAF can be produced in, is that you can bypass something that's called the blend wall. So typically old style biodiesel, it could only be 7 to 10% max of the road fuel pool, of the fossil diesel pool. So 90% fossil diesel, 10% used cooking oil biodiesel or crop-based biodiesel. Whereas now with HVO, because it's chemically the same effectively as fossil diesel, you can blend more of that into the road fuel pool if that's something that's cost effective. And there are various sort of incentives within the road fuel market, sort of compliance tickets, etc., that sort of incentivize that use. So effectively there's greater demand for renewable diesel, HVO, than there is for SAF in the spot market. Additionally, we've seen the rise of China. China had anti-dumping duties placed on its hydrotreated vegetable oil and biodiesel by the EU in response to a flood of cargoes in 2023 and a subsequent anti-dumping investigation by the EU. As a result, that's incentivized Chinese producers who may have produced HVO more often to focus a bit more on sustainable aviation fuel. And we've seen a fairly steady flow of cargoes since the start of this year from Asia, not just from Neste's operations in Singapore, but also from China. And in addition, the other thing that's been weighing a little bit on the market is the promise of and the expectation of more supply. So most recently, Neste announced that its Rotterdam facility had been expanded, and that now brought its total global capacity of sustainable aviation fuel. And I should stress, this is capacity. This is not what the company is producing, far from it, to about 1.5 million tons per year. So that's 1 million ton capacity in Singapore and 500,000 ton capacity at the Rotterdam facility. Now, it should be stressed that in the fourth quarter of last year, Neste's sales were of sustainable aviation fuel were 195,000 tons. So effectively, there's no indication that suddenly there's going to be 1.5 million tons of SAF coming on the market in the next year, but it's there and it's weighing.
Yeah, and as we can see from, and as you mentioned, Tom, there is SAF mandates in the UK and the EU, so that means that supply needs to be created, and that is on the obligation of the fuel supplier, such as Neste,
right.
BP, Shell. So we know. So just this one example, we know that that the mandates are going to be met for 2025. Now, as you mentioned, 2030 is a much steeper target. So there feels like there is comfort with the 2025 target, but a little bit more skeptical.
Yeah.
Would you say that?
I would say that, yeah. So airlines, as recently as March, at a key conference in Brussels, voiced concern. They, in fact, penned a letter at the A4E Aviation Summit in response to a speech given by an EU official.
Just to say that's Airlines for Europe.
Airlines for Europe, thanks, Sarah. And they penned concern that this was adding unnecessary costs, and that there was going to be concern in being able to afford all of this fuel. But I think within that, and I'm sure Arnaud or Christoph, you can chime in here. In the EU, 2030 marks the introduction of the 1.2%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but 1.2% target for e-fuels. So renewable fuels of non-biological origin, to use the EU term. And then in the UK, that goal by 2028 is 0.2%. Again, not a significant number, but in the UK, additionally, there's something called a heifer cap. So a cap on the sustainable aviation fuel that can come from the current pathway that we have. And that will be only 71% of the SAF can come from there, thereby opening up the field to e-fuels, but also to other production pathways like alcohol to jet, effectively making sustainable aviation fuel from ethanol. That also needs to come from waste sources there. So there's all these kind of cost implications weighing on things, and some of the estimates given by the European Aviation Safety Agency for the cost of these SAFs, particularly eSAF, have been quite high, and so that's been creating a bit of concern. Yeah,
and so on that point, this is exactly why we're having the conversation today, because the mandates are in place, as you mentioned, Tom. The cost, currently cost can be, so jet fuel is around $750 a ton at the moment. A SAF can be probably a minimum of about $2,000 a ton. And as you said, the cost may be coming down.
We've seen in the market, and in the market in Europe, in the barge market, sometimes it's as low as $1,800 per ton. Okay.
Yeah,
but in practice, it fluctuates a little bit. But renewable diesel is maybe around the sort of 1830 mark.
Yeah. So then, essentially, as you say, airlines are kind of unable to what is kind of happening. Well, as you can see, there's an IAG commitment over 14 years. Now that's nearly 1 million tons. So that is a significant. However, it is rare that airlines are going into such contracts and deals, because prices change, as you say, and then what could make an airline basically it can change over those 14 years potentially, and so prices won't be the same. So many airlines are reluctant or unable to kind of commit because of competition topics. But what we are bringing up now, and that's why we're talking about net zero commitments, and from a voluntary point of view, is that how can we ensure that that airline and countries and EU and other groups are meeting their net zero targets and more SAF is being produced. the only way realistically that SAF is going to be produced is if groups, airlines, and travellers are willing to pay for that. That is kind of the crux of our topics today. And of course, Tom has given us the background of what is happening. There is a lot of, the biodiesel and SAF market is very close to each other, and some are displacing each other. However, there are now these targets to be met to ensure that, for example, the 10% and beyond in 2035, 40 onwards, we really need to start developing the voluntary market. Now, FGA's work has been working on this since 2019. We got a Booking.com grant to work on sustainable aviation fuel, and since then it's been 6 years of developing the market, educating, training groups to understand how SAF, which can be an 80% reduction, can also contribute to their low carbon travel plans. Airlines, of course, known this for some time, but we've been going through a process of educating different groups. This is why we've also invited Arnaud, who will discuss his approach and business model with later. Also, as Tom rightly said, there is also a mandate for e-fuels. E-fuels, once they get going, can use CO2. So we know we've got an abundance of CO2, and that's exactly what we're trying to reduce. So that is the golden bullet. That's kind of an ideal future. But as Christop will be able to let us know, this is a tricky one, isn't it, Christop? Would you like to let us know more about your experience and what you're seeing currently?
Thank you, Sarah. Starting very optimistically, and I'm always putting a smile on my face when I hear very optimistic messages like you just mentioned, Thomas. Believing in mandates and seeing mandates actually come to fruition. This is beautiful, and I think you're 100% right. We basically have only one available SAF candidate now, and this is HEFA based, full stop. Everything else is future, and everything else is, moving to the next stage. Now, are we capable? Are we willing? Are we financially equipped to move to the next stage? That's the question. I'm not questioning the motivation and the intention and the political goodwill and mobilization. This is all in place. This is all wonderful. However, launching a completely new market, it may, for some people who are not so familiar with the terminology, SAF and eSAF basically sounds very similar, but it's a different animal. It's a completely different animal. And launching an eSAF market that is like a new product, this is not only a technical challenge, technical engineering challenge, it's a financial challenge. It's the birth of a new market. It's like journey to a new frontier, and it demands a lot more than innovation. It requires, number one, risk awareness, risk readiness, wholehearted engagement, and skin in the game. And you look around, you look at the press releases, and I guess more importantly at the releases of individual airlines or companies or developers or oil majors, which of these four elements they actually embrace, and they embrace wholeheartedly. What I'm saying is this market and this new product requires a team approach, with every member of this team putting in skin in the game. And who are these members? It goes way beyond the politicians, the dear guys in Brussels, who never leave their climatized offices. And it's easy for them to put a nice, 1.2 or 2 or, increasing percentages, publish these percentages, and then basically pray that the market will take these percentages as a given and ultimately, obligatory binding. But guess what? It's not going to happen like this. What we are still lacking today is a team, a group commitment, and consisting of developers, off-takers, and I'm sure Arnaud has his challenges with off-takers and aggregating and coordinating and optimizing and synchronizing off-takers, investors, OEMs, and regulators. These guys right now are not yet singing the same song. They are on different pages of the same book. Yes, it's the same book, but different pages. To maybe put a little bit of gasoline in the fire here, so that it doesn't, it gives a little bit of food for thought for our distinguished audience. From a business and bankability perspective, today, developing and operating power-to-liquid or eSAF plants of an industrial scale is not commercially viable, full stop. Production costs are too high. End customers, and again, I'm looking at Arnaud, end customers cannot absorb the price gap without risking financial instability. They may be willing to, but they don't have the financial capacity.
Have we lost? Can anybody else?
Time. So what does it ends by coming to this, by supporting financially, by A, reducing production, and B, making it affordable for off-takers. The question is, who has the funds and who can provide the financial support to actually make both ends meet and reduce the delta, the cost delta. And this is an exercise which is difficult, which, simply requires coordination between various groups and representatives. And I think one of the early challenges in this market was to actually, Tom mentioned that, is educating the players about what the challenges are. Just putting a mandate in the room and is not, that doesn't do it. And to be very concrete right now, you mentioned the 1.2% mandate for eSAF, which is a sub-mandate, for SAF in general. 1.2% in 2030, supported by all kinds of additional regulatory backup to make it happen. Just in order to make it happen, if you allow us to calculate backwards, from the design via FEED, via FID, final investment decision, to construction, execution, and ultimately, operation of an industrial scale P2L, power to liquid plant, you have to count at least 4, but more reasonably 5 years.
Yeah.
In order to meet the quota in 2030, you just have to look at the map today, and you don't need a calculator to come up with a kind of a little bit disappointing perspective. Is that discouraging? No, but it's a reality check, and I think it's fair to check reality and see what actually needs to be done.
Yeah. So having said that, Christoph, I know obviously you've said this is your experience for the last 20 years. The mandates have really realistically only just come into play. So technically, an eSAF project is technically possible, right?
Yeah. Simple question. It's not like you're going into a supermarket and you just purchase the tools and you put the necessary tools and technical components together and you switch it on and it works. On even a pilot plant, and I'm talking pilot plant like maybe 500 tons, or even the plant that's currently being in the finishing is in the finishing stage in the chemical center in Hughes, outside of the city of Frankfurt. That's a few thousand tons. Yes, the feedstock exists, the technological components exist. and the know-how to integrate. And I think this is the key challenge. It's the integration of various technological systems.
Yeah.
All of that exists. Yes. The challenge is how to scale it.
Yeah. So that is the challenge. Now, what I'm showing on the screen here is a dashboard that actually German research created, and they calculated. They found that 155 projects were developing. Now, as Christoph said, this may involve press releases, very early stage. So this number, is, we need to understand how this number is created. But 20% of these projects are in production currently, operational currently. So that kind of gives the scale. And then, as Christoph has mentioned, the e-fuel projects are even a bigger push right now, because what we're talking what is called first of its kind technology. So the engineers, even though they may have been, what the groups are doing is involving engineers that have been already scaled other technologies. However, they may not have experience in scaling eSAFs, but it's basically as much experience as they possibly can. And for example, Christoph is one of these guys that has been through that operational process. So if anybody is knowing if it's going to work, Christoph is a good one to ask the questions of.
Happy to give you just two very simple examples. And we've heard from Tom the data about Neste oil. Okay, as a matter of fact, I've been commercially dealing with Neste oil in the past, sold biofuels to Neste oil, which was then converted into the appropriate SAF and then sold and used by Lufthansa Airbus A321 between Frankfurt and Hamburg already a few years ago. What Tom mentioned is these guys like to quote their production capacity, and they should do this. This is, of course, this is how their machinery and how their components are engineered. But there's usually a huge difference, a huge delta between what theory allows you to do and what you actually produce and put in the market. When there was a group meeting of all major electrolyzer manufacturers originating, the 3-4 key European companies and a couple of companies from the US. They met and they looked at their collective production capacity, and 3-4 of them said, we turn into gigafactories. Giga, capacity. And what I'm recommending to everyone in this call, on this podcast, is before you believe beautiful, like this one, SAF monitor has a beautiful colors, looks nicely formatted and everything, why should you question that? Visit the gigafactories, visit the production sites, visit the locations. And, I'm still an optimist because I believe in this market, but I'm at the same time a realist because I've seen how people are dependent on, misusing or sugarcoating theoretic information and then trying to artificially match it with reality. And very often this match doesn't exist. So I'm encouraging you, based on personal experience and observation, that even when you see the most beautiful numbers, visit the site, have a look. And I admit my own sins in the past. Super large site, 60,000 tons, press releases left, right, and center, government backup, government support, prime minister showing up, for official inauguration, and still it takes extra time. Still it takes extra funding. Still you have a few rounds extra, and you have unexpected, challenges along the way.
Yeah.
Last message. The 2030 quota and even Tom, it's only 1.2%. We will potentially only meet if absolutely no hiccups are taking place with the 4 or 5. I would limit it to a handful of companies that at least have the capacity, that have the know-how. They don't yet have an FID, so you may actually limit who qualifies. If you, I checked this yesterday. I asked AI, please identify every single European first and then global company that can demonstrate FID, final investment decision, for power to liquid production. You don't want to hear the numbers.
Well, in some ways we do, but as you say, it's very interesting you're saying this, because this is exactly the reason why this conversation is about innovation, and that's why it's called net zero market making, because all of us on this call are very aware that actually what we've been doing for the last few years is making a brand new market, like you've said. These products have only existed in theory, as you also said, and actually we've been developing these different mechanisms. What has closed actually is the Advanced Fuel Fund by the UK's Department of Transport, and what that fund is doing is making sure all of these projects that want to get to final investment decision are given an opportunity to scale, because what investors do not generally do is invest in the pre-seed or seed work. This means all of the work to put the designs in place to work out the budgets for scaling, and sometimes this work actually costs around 20 million. So certain groups that are going for these grants, and that also EU grants are also available to make this work happen. Also, I was a coordinator for a Horizon Europe grant last year, and that was about market making for SAF as well. So there is all of these grants and opportunities in place, and we'll come on to Arnaud's solutions later. But these are exactly the points. I wanted to invite Christop as well to give his, as we've discussed, maybe there is skepticism, but also realism. So you very clearly said it is possible. I think when we had our chat, you said maybe 2 or 3 plants maybe in production by 2030. Is that what you?
Yes.
You were, yeah.
Yes.
Well, we can see, and also actually Fly Green Alliance and some other groups are now part of Project Sky Power. So this is a real push to make e-fuel projects work. Get to a financial investment decision by 2030.
I think that's good initiative. Sky Power is a good initiative. Another good initiative, and I'm sure Arnaud has background information on that, is the guys that are doing auctions, two-sided auctions, to make sure that production costs are lower, and then obviously generate an artificially attractive price that facilitates the purchase. We see this in particular for green hydrogen and for ammonia. We don't see it yet. We haven't seen it yet for eSAF.
Yeah.
H2 Global, these are the guys, I'm sure you're aware of them. There are still 100 legal hiccups. It's not yet working as it is supposed to be. Give you one example. The green credentials of eSAF, who gets them? Again, I'm looking at Arnaud's picture here. And this is why the first auctions from H2 Global didn't work out, because they couldn't agree on who actually can claim the benefit of the green credentials of the eSAF. So it didn't work out. RSB are doing a lot of work, and so there is certain groups that we can actually, and just coming on to another topic to do with the costs now, and I seen one of your posts on LinkedIn, Christoph, and it was about the International Maritime Organization, and globally they've decided upon a price for carbon. Have you got any comments on this? Unfortunately, I'm biased, so of course I have a comment, but that's why I'm mentioning upfront I'm biased. I worked for the beautiful sister organization of IMO, ICAO, for many years. I've been for ICAO in Africa, a lot of countries. And all these guys, all these organizations suffer from one thing, and that is to agree on a common denominator among 170, 180 countries. Okay, so one country, one vote. And as you have seen and certainly observed in the last couple of days, it's not always those countries that we believe, and in the past it was often like third world countries, African countries, nations that are, being threatened by, tsunamis, and if the water level rises 50 centimeters, they are already in danger. But now we have countries like the US who walk out of the IMO talks. So the reason why I'm biased, unfortunately, I experienced the incredible time it takes to come to an agreement. Because it takes so long, I appreciate what IMO has managed for many, many years, probably for decades. ICAO was considered as the bigger sister, like the leading company, and IMO would basically copy or rubber stamp ideas, concepts that were initially developed by ICAO. And guess what? Now IMO is bypassing ICAO turtle speed. So I personally like that. It sends definitely a strong signal. If it is enough or not enough, that is not the main point. It is a super strong signal. And, it puts prices on, pollution. And it makes it more easy to calculate. And, it's a good development.
Mm-hmm.
And, shipping may not be the number one industry that we think of when thinking of, CO2 and atmospheric pollution and so on. Aviation was, maybe it's more obvious. It's part of everyday life, and we all fly and we all take aircraft, on a very regular basis. But now shipping has moved forward with more determination. Again, also, to what extent it will be legally binding, the next sessions and the next meetings will show. But it's definitely a very, very strong signal, and I personally appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, and again, you are bringing experience at the table. You understand. Actually, I think there's 193 member states and members of ICAO now. But I think there's basically it's a group, a lot of countries to try and get to an agreement point. Also in the US, Airlines for America has been very clear that it will be voluntary commitments within SAF that are the most stable right now. However, I've just introduced the Californian group to Norwegian Airline, who were on a study trip to Norway, and they are the Californian group said that the fifth largest economy in the world. They've got some agreed commitments to invest and produce SAF. So there are certain, even though kind of obviously where there is political volatility, there are certain pieces of work still moving forward which are positive and can kind of see through a short-term change politically. So I think we have to also consider all of these factors that are coming up. So yeah, so the group in California made up of, it was the California Foundation on the Economy and the Environment, and they flew on SAF by Norwegian Airline. The group were legislators, industry leaders, energy producers. So it was a really interesting group. They were taking knowledge from Norway back to California to work on kind of net zero in their state. So yeah, of course, in Europe, there is legislation in the EU, in the US, who are also being pro SAF. There are changes, but we can look to also the positives. Now, as I said, everything that Christoph has mentioned is kind of some of the reality. as I also said, this is an innovation topic. So I would like to invite Arnaud to discuss. As Arnaud mentioned, his background is aviation for a long time, so he understands the targets of aviation. He also knows technically very well what is happening within the sector. So Arnaud, can you let us know who are your investors? Why do you think this is the right time to start this work, and can you tell us more about your approach and platform?
Yep, thanks Sarah. So I think bouncing on what Tom was saying, it's all about the market dynamics. I mentioned that today SAF is mainly produced by HEFA and is kind of in that over capacity, but that's going to switch significantly in the 2030, where there's the HEFA cap, but there's also just a lack of feedstock like used cooking oil, tallow, to be able to feed that process. So we have to transition to the other technologies, which are the alcohol to jet, the gas Fischer-Tropsch, and the eSAF. So knowing that to meet the mandate, we have to transition to these. What do the airlines want? Well, they want more or less one thing, is to be at the same level playing field than their competitors. They need a pricing where they know that they're not going to pay more than their direct competitor. It's even more important for them than the baseline kind of price of the SAF. And so when you look at how a production plant is done, a production plant is between 500 million and several billion of investment. Each producer needs to have a relatively stable return on investment over 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And to have that relatively stable return on investment, it needs to have a pricing that is relatively stable. But so if an airline is the one that actually does the long-term offtake contract with the producer, like a 10-year contract at a relatively stable price, then there's a high risk that that airline is not actually at the same level playing field 5 years down the road, because the market will have evolved, technologies will have evolved, the scale of the projects will have evolved, and potentially it's going to be higher. The price that they're paying is going to be higher than the market price. So that's what's blocking today airlines from actually putting most of the airlines from putting long-term offtake commitments, is because they have, if they go straight to the producer, they don't have a guarantee to have the right price at that right moment, and therefore to be uncompetitive. So we need another way to say work out this financial. And coming back to what Christoph was saying, you need a system that where the whole value chain has skin in the game. You can't put all the burden on the airline in order to figure it out. You can't put all the burden on the producers. You need something to stitch the value chain and to distribute the risk. And that's what we do at Atoba by aggregating SAF, by aggregating different types of SAF at different volumes and putting in our basket, more or less, a lot of different projects, which enables to manage the pricing risk and the availability risk. So the availability risk, we mentioned starting in 2030, we're going to switch from an oversupply or an overcapacity to an under supply, which means there has to be some availability. And by having a pool of producers in our portfolio, we enable that management of the risk for the airline. And the second one is pricing management for the airlines. So as we have a pool of producers which is representative or better than the average, I'd say, market, we're able to guarantee to the airline a pricing that is kind of market index based, and not a pricing which is linked to one producer with one technology and one feedstock. And so by delivering that, it provides that security for the airline to be at the level playing field or better all along the say 10-year commitment. So that's what unlocks a little bit the market, and it really needs to happen, because if you look at the like for example the BNEF report that shows the difference between the economic transition scenarios and the net zero scenarios, you see that the SAF two curves are really like don't align. The net zero has a very strong volume requirement in terms of increase, but the economic reality is not that great. And that's why you need financial mechanism and financial innovation in the way things are done in order to bridge that gap and manage the risk and have everybody have a skin in the game, as you said, Christoph.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting who your founders are. Some of your founders are working in climate finance. Would you like to explain more about also you as a company, Arnaud?
Yep. So for sure. So in order to do what we do, more or less, you need to manage the entire, like stitch together the value chain. So from the aviation side, which is my background, through energy financing, which is so we're 6 co-founders, which is 3 of the co-founders come from that energy financing, doing gigafactories, having raised 3 billion to be able to do gigafactories in the energy business. And so you need that part, but you also need to select the right projects with the right technologies and with the right risk management. So 2 of our co-founders are coming from the large-scale renewable project environment, 1 from the EPC and construction side, and 1 from the more technology on equipment for biofuel, e-fuels, hydrogen, and that kind of activities.
Yeah, so it's and actually I looked up today, so the UK is also putting out a consultation to explore the voluntary carbon market because they see that actually the voluntary carbon market isn't being utilized enough for net zero. There's been definitely skepticism about the market because of whether offsets are reliable or not, but they are expanding that consultation because the voluntary carbon market, which essentially is climate finance, is worth 2 billion. So and that is a growing sector. So the kind of signals from a market point of view are definitely demonstrating that groups and legislation is pushing forward and enforcing net zero targets, SAF, and that is part of that. So that's globally accepted that aviation is going to work on SAF. I think all Boeing, Airbus, all groups are basically in agreement that SAF, rather than hydrogen for now, is going to be the push. As Arnaud mentioned, it is about creativity. Traditional financing, for example, from a bank isn't working currently because a bank from day one wants to know that every month they're going to get paid back. Now, as Christoph has rightly said, and we've mentioned before, actually even setting up, doing the engineering process, the design process, that can take 1 year, 2 years. Then once you're kind of, the engineering is maybe not quite right, then it can take up to 5 years. Now, very few banks or investors are going to basically invest in that phase. So it is definitely about understanding these phases as well and coming up with unblocking, as Arnaud has mentioned. So just to be kind of go through things again, Arnaud. So then your process. So for example, when we are thinking in this way, there is delays to production, there is delays to basically making the volume. How then do you then therefore your process can be presented to banks or investors, and you are able to how is that going, and how are you starting that process basically?
So what's blocking, as we said previously, the system is for producers to get long-term offtake commitments to be able to launch their financing capability. And what's key in these long-term offtake commitments is that they need to be bankable, so they can be financed both from an equity and from a debt financing possibility. We all know that, like the aviation, each individual airline it's a low margin business. It's a 3% margin business. Bankability of each airline is not the greatest in the industry. What we do to help and to support that in order to do bankable offtakes is we aggregate both, so the producer, but we aggregate the airline and the demand. And by doing that, we also distribute the risk for the producers for the long-term offtake, and enhance the credit worthiness of the offtake.
And I think that's a really key point, the credit worthiness, because actually, classically, airlines don't have the best credit rating. So could you want to kind of elaborate, just kind of highlight these points and why it is a solution, what you're developing is a solution to a key problem?
Yeah, well, the banks need so solid credit worthiness in order to provide the loan to the producers, and airlines have a tendency to fail, to switch, to go bankrupt. I mean, it's an industry that's a little bit fragile, and therefore, if a producer passes a long-term offtake contract directly with one airline, there's a significant risk that it won't be approved for a majority of the airlines because there's not that credit worthiness. So, but when you distribute that risk, and when you say more or less one offtake contract from one of our producers at Atoba is distributed along many airlines and an aggregation of airlines, then if you have one airline that fails in our portfolio at Atoba, then you redistribute the volume to the other airlines, and you do that through a flexibility mechanism, which significantly enhances the credit worthiness of the overall system, and therefore enables the offtake to be bankable.
Yeah.
So it solves both and that's why it's really important, that skin in the game, and that because what we take in terms of like risk and in terms of management is we have to guarantee that our portfolio is as good or as better as the overall industry. So we're taking part of the risk, and we're managing part of the risk by our private management.
Yeah. How do you prove that actually? How have you built your own kind of credibility?
Well, it's building. So it's in the building right now. We're discussing. I mean, you were mentioning you have here 155. We actually have more than 155 in our database, and that we're discussing with all of the producers constantly in order to create that offtake from both the producers, but also with the airlines. But I think what's important is that in terms of the risk, you have a lot of you mentioned two things. You mentioned the risk management, but also the pricing management, and I think they go together in terms of the pricing, and to be able to find solutions with the separating the scope 3, so the environmental attributes, and putting corporates in the mix in order to take part of the cost, in order to distribute the cost on the price of the SAF between the airlines and corporates that want to decarbonize. I think that's a really important part. And then managing the risk and having entities that actually take part of the risk in order to distribute it. You see a lot of initiatives that actually try to play as an intermediate between the different players, but they're not taking the risk. They're putting people together, but they're not taking the risk, and therefore not necessarily solving the problem, because you need to take part in the risk to be able to stitch the risk value chain together and actually offer a solution.
Yeah, to sort of de-risk essentially. It's to soften the risk for the investor. And so, and who are your customers? Airlines or also corporates?
So our customers are threefold. They're airlines who are going to. So airlines have two ways to see us. One is the security of supply and security of the pricing on the mandatory side, because we have a very, as we're discussing with all of the producers, we have a very competitive offer. The other one is on the voluntary side, to provide additional volumes for them. The second customers that we have are the jet fuel resellers that actually don't have SAF in their portfolio of production and need to source SAF at a competitive price. So there's the second customers, and the third ones are the corporates for the scope 3 activities, and to find the balance between the right pricing mechanisms.
And just so you're quite new. You mentioned you're 6 months old, so you've got some years. So what's your kind of trajectory for how are you going to measure your success, and are you starting to see it?
Yeah, so our success is measured by the long-term offtake contracts that we sign. These take a little bit of time because they're one contract for 10 years more or less of SAF. We're talking about hundreds of millions of contracts, so they take more or less 12 to 18 months to actually go from the very beginning to the signature.
Yeah.
So we're in that phase. So we more or less go from MOUs to term sheets to binding contracts, and we're in that trajectory of these 18 months to get to the binding contracts. We see a lot of positive traction from the entire ecosystem because we're offering something that's not available today, that's innovative, that's enabling to stitch that value chain.
Yeah, and you on price, we kind of been discussing. Actually, to get the SAF market moving, we do need to use the voluntary commitment. So do you have what's your thoughts on the voluntary carbon market, or how do we get, what is the work needed to get more voluntary commitments?
So I think the work that's needed to get more voluntary is to have clear first offers that actually solve the issue from end to end. Because part of the difficulty is that it's a complex value chain, and for example, one typical example is that generally you cannot dissociate the scope 1 and scope 3, so the scope 3 decarbonization before the blending of the SAF with jet fuel. So you already have an ecosystem that needs to put and a value chain that needs to be put together to figure out, okay, when can you get the scope 3 from who, not necessarily from the direct producer, but from a blender. And all of that is a complicated ecosystem that you need to master in order to have an offer that you can actually fulfill to corporates. And this is what today we're putting together in order to, let's say, make it easy to actually decarbonize. And also what we're trying to do is also have the corporates do long-term commitments. And what I mentioned in terms of the airlines wanting a level playing field, the right price at the right time, the corporates want the same thing. They don't want to do it like a 10-year or 5-year contract on a carbon pricing and be overpriced in 5 years from now. So they need the same level of market-based pricing mechanisms, and that we can do through our aggregation.
So you do see, so corporates are essential.
Oh yeah, corporates are essential in order to make the pricing difficulty for the airlines manageable.
Yeah, I've just put on this screen so these are some assumptions. There's now about more science-based targets commitment. There's also nearly 10,000 B Corp certified companies. Now, I made some assumptions that if all of those committed to an amount of SAF, the same amount as Norwegian Armed Forces, that actually those alone could displace 7% of the jet fuel market with SAF. Now, these are based on several assumptions, so if you are interested in these figures, then please get in touch. Now, we're coming towards the end. I realise I have, if anybody's got any questions, please put your hand up, come off mute. We've had that, yeah. I realise we're coming towards the end of the hour, but if you have any questions, I think it's a really interesting conversation. Innovation is absolutely key. Realism is key as well. Otherwise, you literally will not make it. So really appreciate Christop's experience and comments today. Tom, it's great to understand the market as a whole, but also the biofuel market, because it isn't separate. It is very much connected. I know it's great that you've come from aviation and you've seen what the problem is and you're coming up with solutions with a group that are already working in climate finance, so they understand the need, but also that there is a market developing and it is there and it is getting mandated. There is always politics, but there are ways to push forward with innovation as well. So let me know if anybody's got any questions, let me know. Otherwise, yep, I invite you to These are our members currently. Everybody's working in net zero innovation. That's the core of our work. So if you're interested in joining, we've got some great examples from Norwegian Airline, as mentioned this week, and Californian Foundation on the Environment and the Economy. We're pushing work forward. We're making the market. So if you have any questions, then please get in touch with me. And this is, third episode. We look forward to the fourth one. And if not, any questions? If not, I will say thank you very much to our presenters, and I will, be in touch with everybody and look forward to seeing everybody at episode 4.
Thank you for moderating.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Christoph. Thanks, Arnaud. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.